7 years is the kind of round, even biblical number that starts to stand for an era, a period of time that's identifiable in historical terms. And because we are now at the 7 years since September 11th mark, I think it's appropriate and does no offense to the memory of the victims of the attack to ask ourselves about the broader historical significance of the events that took place then and their consequences for the world around us, not only of that day itself, but equally significantly, and I will argue to you shortly, in some sense even more significantly, through the response of the United States to the September 11th events and through the ways that our interaction with the world since September 11th has shaped the global historical period in which we now find ourselves and will shape our future. And that is that immediately after September 11th, the United States had to make, at the national level, a crucial policy decision about whether we were going to address the attacks of September 11th as a crime, a terrible crime without any question, and a crime that crossed international borders, but a crime nevertheless, or whether we were going to address the events of September 11th as an act of war against the United States. Now, the choice between crime and war, in retrospect, seems to a very great extent to have been an easy or an automatic one. As we all know, at the national level, the United States chose to identify the events of September 11th as an act of war. We began, in reply, what went under the name of the Global War on Terror. That name has now been shelved, at least inside of the Pentagon, but it's still very much with us in the sense that I think we are participants in or bystanders in a war on terror. But that was not an automatic or a necessary move, and more importantly, it was not a move on which everybody converged at the time. A meaningful argument could be made, and was made, shortly after September 11th in public. And if you go back and look at articles written and policy papers framed, there were those who said, and they were not a small minority, that the right move for the United States was to imagine the September 11th attacks as quantitatively much worse than other terrorist attacks we had suffered, but qualitatively not different than other terrorist attacks, like the attack, for example, in Oklahoma City, which should therefore be treated as crime in the sense that our response should be to track down the perpetrators, those who were responsible for sending the hijackers, to capture them, and then here's the key phrase, them to justice. When you fight a war against somebody, the phrase bringing them to justice almost never comes up. And the reason is that war is not a place where justice is meted out. Once in a long while, after you've won a war, World War II is the best example of this, the victor decides it's time to impose some form of justice after the fact, and then you have war crimes tribunals. But the war itself is almost never described as doing justice, for the reason that when we think of justice, we think of judgment. We think of taking the effort to think through guilt and responsibility. We think of proving that guilt and responsibility beyond a certain standard. And then we think about issuing a punishment. By contrast, when we go to war, none of those features are immediately relevant. What's relevant in a war is, first and overwhelmingly most importantly, winning. Once you go to war, there is an overwhelming imperative to win. And second, although one wants to pursue war in a way that doesn't violate basic moralities, the doctrine of necessity, the idea that you have to do whatever is necessary to win the war within some rather circumscribed moral bounds, becomes the overwhelming impetus for treating the people with whom you interact. So just to give you one concrete example of this, in a criminal situation, if you see a person fleeing from the scene of a crime, you cannot shoot that person. You ordinarily, in most legal systems, have to catch the person. Once you've caught the person, you have to put them on trial through some system that seems fair to you and to others. And then after you've caught them and punished them, only then do we think that you are authorized in punishing them. And indeed, at least in the United States, we still believe, although most of the world has come to disagree with us, that the death penalty is on the table, that you could actually kill that person in cold blood after judgment. By contrast, think of the way that war relates to that paradigm of crime. In war, if I see you running away from me, I am authorized under the laws of war to shoot and kill you. I can't do that if you've already surrendered, but if you're running away, I can shoot and kill you. If I catch you, not only am I not obligated to put you on trial and punish you, under the ordinary laws of war, I cannot punish you. I have to treat you as a prisoner of war, holding you until the war is over, at which point I'm supposed to repatriate you back to the country from which you've come. And then, ultimately, of course, under ordinary circumstances, I cannot punish you. So the situation is almost exactly opposite in the paradigm of war than it is in the paradigm of crime. So why did we choose the paradigm of war with enormous consequences about which I'm going to speak?